Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. You can find him on Twitter at SJMuir. Welcome back to the show, Stewart.
Hey, thanks, Jim.
Stewart, it's going to be a miserable Christmas for BC's logging communities. And as friend of the show, Jordan Bateman from the Independent Contractors and Business Association pointed out, you know, the lower mainland of Vancouver is very much connected to forestry with all of the mills and lumber shops and furniture factories and so on, and Ladner, Surrey, and all the dock workers who deal with the lumber. And I live in New Westminster in a high-rise overlooking the Fraser River, where I see the log booms come up and down the river. A few of those logs are exported directly onto ships, but that's very little of the traffic. You explained that to us. 98% or something is turned into stuff to build homes with. We always talk about affordable housing in BC, but if you stop logging here, where is BC going to have to get its lumber from?
Yeah, great question. I mean, there's different kinds of lumber. There's the commodity stuff, the 2x4s that you build a house with. You know, right here in BC, we have the world's biggest sawmill that produces 2x4s. It's up in Houston in the northwest of the province. That's a stick that you can produce anywhere and is produced anywhere. There's nothing particularly special about it. And that's in contrast. I mean, it's necessary for building a house. You couldn't build a house without it. But it's in contrast to other kinds of wood, more specialty that comes out of the forests as well. And often that's got some qualities to it with the fiber, you know, knot free and tight grain, and it's useful for specialty building projects, architectural uses where, you know, you walk into, say, the Vancouver Convention Center, that place, it just glows with this beautiful orange from the wood there, which is sustainably harvested wood. A lot of it would be older trees that have had time to grow large and the knots are spaced out. You know, that's the kind of thing that architects around the world actually look to British Columbia for, because we produce this specialty stuff. It doesn't grow in Finland or Alabama, where they produce lots of 2x4s and compete with us on that. This is special stuff that comes out of the rainforest that takes, you know, very particular stewardship and conditions to bring about. It's something that's come from BC for a long, long time. And there's every reason to believe that it will, if conditions are allowed to continue, will continue to be produced long into the future, you know. And Vancouver produces lots of that. It's amazing. You know, once you talk to people there, and Victoria too, the niche businesses doing all kinds of specialty work. Recently, I visited a store owner who had in the back of his shop in Victoria a woodworking shop where they produce tables and different kinds of furniture. Even though there's a storefront there, they don't actually use a storefront to sell furniture. It displays furniture. It's more like a showroom, because their customers aren't in Victoria. Their customers are in New York City and Texas and Los Angeles, who want these high-end pieces made with specialty timber that can only be sourced in our forests. And beautiful stuff. I mean, you touch it and you just want to have that in your house. You want to be around it. Everyone has everyone I know, that same emotional attraction to the beauty of wood. I love having wood furniture around me. And I also know that, you know, to have that wood, you have to get it. You have to harvest it and find it. And, you know, that's the diversity of our coastal forest industry. And I think it's something that, you know, we're losing sight of that a little bit when there are moves to essentially curtail it to the point where it may well become economically unviable. And so when we do want that wood in the future, we're getting it from places. We're either doing without it, we're using plastics or resins or building with cement, other materials, or if we're getting wood, we're getting it from the Amazon or from the rainforests of Indonesia, the more specialized wood. We could be producing that stuff under the strictest rules, the best environmental standards in the world, or we could be getting it off ships where it's coming from places where we don't know that it's sustainably produced. I know where I stand on that, and I think a lot of people, if they think about the issues and do a little research, would probably think as I do about it.
For every tree harvested in BC, how many are replanted?
The figure I hear, Jim, is 3 are replanted.
How many are replanted when they take a tree down in the Amazon?
Well, that's the difference between reforestation, which is what we do in BC, not always perfectly, and there's, standards that always have to be elevated, versus deforestation, which recently, if anyone was following the climate conference in Glasgow, Scotland, they were talking about deforestation a lot. Deforestation is not a problem we have in Canada. I mean, unless you consider building another new subdivision in Langford or Surrey to be deforestation, which, I guess it might be, but it's not on the mass scale that we have in parts of the world where that forest is raised, the timber is turned into lumber, which is sold for money, and nothing's done to remediate the landscape. And it's maybe turned into ranch land or farmland, or it's just left there to, regenerate by natural causes, processes over time, which isn't a way to guarantee that it will regenerate in a biodiversity-friendly way. So you've got this problem of vast scale of deforestation that was identified as one of the big climate problems. When you see, this year the new data on Brazil, believe it or not, just when you thought, it wasn't bad enough already, it's actually accelerating, getting much worse there. I think if we want to be properly concerned about the state of the world's forests, we should look to places where the regulations are lacking. And one thing we don't lack for here in BC is regulations. There's more than 100 bureaucratic steps required before a tree can be harvested. The stewardship, the consultation is so extensive that it makes for a very challenging environment. And ultimately, when something does get done, it's done properly.
First Nations were told that they would be properly consulted before any new logging policy came in because First Nations people rely on logging for, I would think, a substantial amount of their employment. Were they properly consulted?
Well, I think that the broad direction of more involvement in forestry and any other activity on the land base involving First Nations who are, in that territory in a traditional sense is exactly the right direction we need to go in. And it is indeed the direction we are going in. Some recent changes that were brought forward from, one part of the provincial government seem to have missed a step. And I do hope that the government is able to look a little more closely, see why it is that groups like the BC First Nations Forestry Council and quite a growing list of individual First Nations have said, excuse me, we don't think you are considering our rights when you make a move like this to arbitrarily exclude our interests. And that's what's apparently happened according to First Nations. Now, I think I always try to tread carefully there. I'm not one who in any sense can, speak for First Nations. I'm really just reflecting what I've tracked and documented in terms of a large number of First Nations pushing back and saying, hold on a second. So hopefully good sense will prevail and there will be listening that occurs before measures are taken that will affect a great deal of employment opportunities, investment opportunities for First Nations, not only First Nations, but certainly First Nations very extensively.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Right now in Vancouver, because of the extensive flooding in the Fraser Valley and the fact that the one pipeline that brings oil from Edmonton to Burnaby to be refined into gasoline is questionable. It may be starting up now, but it was exposed by all the floods and certainly was at risk. We're being rationed at 30 liters per fill-up, 7.5 gallons U.S. per fill-up, and that's for our American listeners, and they'll tell you, you can't go far on that. So we're already experiencing gasoline rationing, but you say the long-term picture for oil and gas, and the vast majority of people, of course, in BC, Canada, and North America still use gasoline and diesel to power their vehicles. What's the long-range outlook?
Yeah, I think the long-range picture for the use of crude oil, just taking that part of it, is that there will be, for decades to come, not 5, 10, or 15 years, but decades and decades to come, there will be a societal reliance on a substance that is really the driving force of modern civilization. And crude oil has brought a great deal of benefit. It's also got negatives that we're very well aware of. And, rather than the polarizations that seem to have driven a lot of the social discourse on it, what I would like to see is a unifying force of shared innovation toward making sure that the benefits that are inherent to the materials that we rely on can be enjoyed while the negatives can be managed down. And that's a very rational thing to be doing. I think we can all understand that because we apply it to every aspect of our life. We should apply it to how we use fuel as well. At the same time, yes, we should be looking at alternatives, but the photovoltaic cell has been around since the 1840s. It still hasn't changed the way that the world consumes energy, and I say that because 80% of our energy today comes from fossil fuels. If that invention almost 200 years ago, was about to change the world, well, we're still waiting for that to happen. And I do hope that it, increases. And the same is true of other things like wind, where, and I don't knock any one form of energy, I really don't, but we should, be wary of hype that leads to poor decision making. And case in point, right now, we're looking at, because there's a sort of, I would call it a fashion to not invest in oil and gas infrastructure, we have seen a decline in that activity, with the result that we now have a shortage of crude oil that's going to be coming in the near future. That will mean higher prices because everyone will want to have a smaller amount. And then there's going to be a rush to reinvest in oil and gas. We've been talking for years and hearing for years about divestment, that we should divest from this. Some are saying, well, you shouldn't build this or that, no new infrastructure. Well, yeah, we're going to need that infrastructure because new wells need to be drilled as old ones are exhausted, and you need to have infrastructure to move things from the point where it's produced to where it's consumed. That all costs money, and the sum that was out this week in Houston, where there was a big energy conference, was that $12 trillion in spending will be needed to ensure adequate crude oil and gas supplies between now and 2030. Now in 2025, 4 years, $12 trillion, $3 trillion a year, globally, just to keep up, not to, flood the world with new amounts of oil and gas, but just simply to, hold the line there so that as we, whether we're flying somewhere or, relying on a bus to take us to work or wearing clothes made from petroleum products and shipped around using, we're going to need that amount of investment. Otherwise, we will have sky-high energy prices. So right now, even in the flooding, we didn't see the cost of gasoline go up. I don't think really at all.
It came down
because it was yes, rationing was there. Supplies were found. So it wasn't really a price shock. Yes, it was a transportation shock. No one expected that this pipeline from the 1950s that served, I think, without interruption that whole time, should suddenly be disrupted in late 2021, but it did happen. And now, they have to finish that that new one that's being built alongside it, the expansion project, because that's part of the National Energy Plan that the government in Ottawa is very much solidly behind, and I think even the government in Victoria is behind as well. They spent some time pushing for improvements to it that they've actually got, and now they've been able to, I think, back off from the opposition quite a bit. We all know we need it. So that's the reality of where we are today. And at the same time, I haven't talked about the improvements and the transformation of what's inside the pipeline. That's probably the biggest story coming out of Canada. We saw today one of the major companies out of Alberta, Cenovus, a great Canadian company, not a foreign-owned company, but one that's in our own pension plans and our RRSPs and traded on our stock exchange. They announced plans for their continuing decarbonization of their oil products out of the oil sands and other areas where they produce oil. So you got all these big Canadian companies that are leading that. The international companies that are invested here, most of them are doing a good job of identifying what the priorities are. They're probably doing a mixed job in actually delivering on those, and that's why we need to have continuing pressure to make sure that gets done. But since we have no recourse but to rely on this fuel type, we must invest in it. And what do we do exactly? I mean, there's no magic wand for it. Work has to be done. In Canada, the new Pathways project out of the oil sands will be led by 4 or 5 of the big producers. What they're going to do is build a pipeline from Fort McMurray over to Cold Lake, Alberta, where in that location there is geological formations that will allow for the storage of greenhouse gases rather than emission into the atmosphere. You can't do that at Fort McMurray. It doesn't really have the
soil is full of oil. No need to store it there.
Well, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So if you can't do it here, then move it to where it is. And that's what they're doing. They'll be spending billions of dollars to do that. And by doing that, they will be reducing the carbon footprint of Canadian oil, which can only be a good thing in a time when that's the expectation everyone has, that we're transforming our energy system in the right way, but we're not transforming our way of life to the point where we don't include, fuels that we require to live more or less the way we do.
I always ask these protesters when they block a road, how did you get here? Did you ride a bike? Because that bike's got rubber tires made out of petroleum and a frame made either out of carbon fiber that was probably harvested from natural gas, and steel that needed some kind of high temperatures to be processed. Yeah. They don't get it. And I say, look, we all want to live in a better, nicer environment, but what are your alternatives to bridge between one to the other, and is the other ready to be used? Because Europe saw what happened when they relied on wind power. The wind died down, and they're still paying incredibly high prices for natural gas because of that 2-week wind turbine shutdown.
Yeah, I don't understand. You've got all these experts telling you year after year, you must do this, don't worry, there's no downside. And then all of a sudden, there's no wind for weeks. And the cost of fuel just skyrockets, and poor people are shivering at home. Why didn't these clever people think of that? I think we need to make sure we've got good brains involved in these transformations. And, that's another reason why I think the polarization, right now, young people, I'm told, are saying no to getting into petroleum engineering courses. There was even one program that they scrapped at the University of Calgary because there weren't enough students to bother with. Not having the expertise to be able to manage that, for sure that's going to bite us in the rear in years to come, because even though it may not be the most fashionable thing, it's still what powers the economy. So I think the polarizations that cause young people to question whether the things that we rely on will be relied on in future may have unintended consequences. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong on that. But for the moment, with the known knowns we have, I think I'm right that we do need to reduce polarization and encourage people to just simply take a pragmatic look at the facts as they exist, and then do all that we can do to manage these impacts. I noticed the other day there was a highway block, the Pat Bay Highway, going from Victoria to Swartz Bay where the ferries are, also up to the airport. It was blocked off by really a handful or two handfuls of individuals who felt that this is what they had to do to, I don't know, save the planet or something. So they blocked the whole, it was a Saturday, a weekend afternoon, blocked it for hours and hours. Gosh knows how many people missed ferries and flights just so that these few individuals could make themselves heard. And then at the end of it, the photographer was there and captured them walking away to the nearby parking lot and jumping in their cars and driving home. I just thought that was, one of those things that should be in the best of the year we've just ended list that people do in the media business. The most egregious act of energy hypocrisy imaginable. And by the way, the road that we're going to notice, December 11th, there's the Extinction Rebellion talking today about how in Metro Vancouver, so if you're a driver in Metro Vancouver, I hope you're listening, they're going to show up on Highway 1 randomly in multiple locations on that day, December 11th. What day of the week is that anyways?
Saturday.
That's a Saturday. There you go, a Saturday. Right before Christmas, people are shopping, they're getting their kids around for their activities, all that stuff. They're going to be blocking it off. That tactic was done, multiple blockades in a major road network at the same time in the UK this fall. And what the authorities did was they managed to get a nationwide injunction banning that kind of thing on all road networks. So if anyone from the Attorney General's office is listening, you might be thinking about the legal strategy, because this will be, for those people who are just simply going about their business, suddenly having to idle for hours in traffic, adding additional pollution to the airshed in Metro Vancouver so that a handful of individuals can indulge themselves with this declaration of whatever it is. That's not going to be accepted by anyone.
Stewart, thank you so much for chatting with us.
You're most welcome.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. You can also contact him by Twitter at SJMuir. If you have any questions for Stewart or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com and we'll ask that question for you. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at HowStreet. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.